For this New Year's resolution, I decided to start finally finishing some of my projects. So you might be wondering, oh, is he going to finish the shield? Well, no, I'm not. Not right now. But I remembered this one project that I was doing. Actually, I might have talked about it in a past video, but I had all this file left over from when I filled in the hole in the shield, and it was a really good chunk of steel because, it's file steel, so it's got to be made out of something nice. So I figured I'd turn it into something. So the first thing I did was take off all the file barbs. And I did this because I kind of wanted to, do some hammering on it, and I didn't want them to fill back in. I wanted to keep that nice file pattern. So once I got it all cleaned up, I picked up a design, and the design I went for is the SKS bayonet. So I thought this looked pretty cool, and I went searching online. It took me a while, but I found some decent enough, hopefully accurate enough measurements. So I cut it all down to size, and this time I was careful to avoid slicing my finger, because that would be stupid. So this time I just cut the metal. And actually, I loved this. This was super duper satisfying. So once I cut it a certain amount of the way through, instead of trying to saw it more, I tried to break it, just so that I didn't catch the saw blade and shatter it, or the grinder blade. And so once I got it cut probably 3/4 of the way, I went ahead and just snapped it, and it popped off just like that. So it was super awesome. Then I was left with this. And so from here it was too wide, so what I did was I started cutting in these little grooves. And you might be wondering, why are you cutting in the grooves? Well, I'm cutting in the grooves because I didn't have any real heavy-duty grinders that could kind of eat off all this steel. So what I did instead was I took this thin blade grinder and I cut a bunch of little channels in it, just like that. And I kind of made teeth. So that way when I cut lengthwise, I could cut the teeth off and they just kind of pick off one by one, so I wouldn't risk shattering my grinder blade. And it actually looked super duper cool. It looked like one of those weird, obsidian battle axes in a movie of some kind. I don't remember which movie I saw it in. But once I did that, all I had to do was cut it off, and this part was super duper satisfying. I wish I'd recorded more of this. So I kind of went just down along the side and was slicing it, and as I'd cut, it just kind of melted away. Oh, look at it go. Isn't it beautiful? Yeah, and it was pretty fun, actually. You can see here I'm using this weird rickety vice grip setup. But, it doesn't matter how rickety it is. It only matters if it works, which it did. It's the right tool for the job if it does the job. That's not true, don't quote me on that. Yeah, and so you'll notice that right now I'm using only the grinder. Well, that's kind of the theme of the video, because every time I'd need something done, I'd go and I'd look and I'd choose between either the grinder or the file, because I've got 0 tools right now. And usually the grinder won out, because I prefer going crazy with the grinder to going crazy with the file. So I'm starting to kind of get that profile in there, and one of the problems I had with the grinder is I didn't cut it perfectly straight. So it left the edges all jagged and ugly. Luckily, I kind of left myself enough wiggle room that I could still clean up the edges and not lose my steel. So I went ahead and did that, kind of sanded it all down, and you can see all the little chunks from when I was cutting off the edge. I just left them there. And so once I got it a certain amount of smooth, I stopped, and now it's time to clean up that tip. Yeah, and so one thing about the grinder is, oh, look at him, he cares all about safety. This guy's a little bit special, but we love him anyways. So one thing about the grinder is that it kicks up a ton of sparks, and so that's why I'm always careful to throw on the gloves, because if you tap yourself with the grinder, don't want to cut your hand, but also those sparks are, well, hot enough to burn a hole in your pants. Don't ask. But you can see it's starting to take shape, and it's still got that big misshape in front. So I went ahead and ate away that front section. And this time I used a wider, more, tooth grit, just to take off more material. So less cutting, more grinding. And so I kind of jumped the gun here because I'm impatient and I like to do that. And I started doing the sides a little bit, which it's not necessarily a bad thing. It didn't damage anything. But I probably shouldn't have done that step quite yet. Probably would have been a little easier if I'd waited. And so once I'm done with all these little side grooves, and I didn't do them very well, I just put in enough to kind of have it look like a dagger, just so I could see what I was working for. I went ahead and moved on to that fuller, the blood groove. And you might be wondering, oh, what tool did you use? I used the grinder. I always use the grinder. That's the reality of one tool workshops. But I got it kind of all shapened, and I went ahead and jumped the gun again because I went straight to the file, even though I hadn't roughed it in enough to actually, get it to be a dagger. But I wanted to kind of see what it would look like, and as you can see, it is a pretty good-looking design. I really love this design. You can I actually don't pull up a picture of the design, I think. The design is, the blood groove, and it's got a couple of different little angles in it that look nice. And here I am taking out that fuller. And this was super stressful because don't want to take off too much, but don't want to take off too little because then you'll end up doing a ton of hand sanding, which I did. And so I went with the Dremel to kind of make sure everything was all, take down the high points and make sure everything's all flat and uniform. And from here, you can kind of see that. From here, I went on to some more sanding, which I probably sat there and, granted I was watching a movie, but probably sat there and sanded for 4 hours. It was a pain. What I've learned is that go crazy with the grinder, destroy it. Just don't sit there and sand for 4 hours. Oh, but here I decided to get a little thrifty, so I wrapped up some sandpaper around my Dremel tool, and it actually worked really well for about 5 to 10 seconds, because then it exploded. And because I'm not an idiot, I decided I'd just go ahead and call it quits and not try that again because it wasn't the it wasn't the best idea. Okay, but after that second attempt, I realized it's not going to work, and so I gave up. I retreated, tactical retreat, and I didn't try again because that would be stupid. Oh, brother. Except I did, but because I'm smart, I didn't try again after that. Because, you know what? Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you. So, once I did all that sanding, and I guess I haven't finished the sanding, so you can kind of see it starting to take shape. And so the reason I'm doing the groove first is because if I screw up on the groove, hopefully I can just kind of keep going. If I do the blade first, though, who knows what will happen. So you can see it's kind of getting a little bit more polished, and it looks pretty ugly because of all that tape, but once I took the tape off, it looks pretty good. And I've done a ton of work off camera, but it was all boring stuff, so I cut that out because who wants to watch boring stuff? Yeah, and actually after this I decided, so I got the groove all done and it was looking really nice, but it just wasn't quite right, so I took it back to the grinder, and all that sanding, all that hard work was all for naught. Basically, the lesson that I've learned in making this is for every minute you spend planning, you'll save like a minute doing. So really, take your time planning it. But here it is, and hopefully in part 2 I'll completely finish it. But thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.